America, known as the land of the free. And yet, it was not that long ago that so many had so little freedom. Women and minorities were banned from even applying to many schools and jobs. Now, with the help of affirmative action, the number of minorities in those institutions is on the rise. But some people are crying foul, claiming those programs meant to combat racism are racist themselves. A young woman says she was denied the opportunity of a lifetime because she is white.
Abigail Fisher's race, white, was held against her.
Race becomes a real thing to hang your hat on. Black kid or Latino kid or got my seat, when in reality that's not true.
Her case has gone all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court, and what the judges decide could drastically change the dynamics in education and employment. Will this be the destruction of a program that many believe helps minorities achieve the American dream?
I have decided to nominate an inspiring woman, Judge Sonia Sotomayor.
Affirmative action was a policy put in place to help level the playing field, period.
Or has the time for affirmative action passed? And why does it have so many divided, even among minorities?
You do not fix the problem of race with race.
As the clock ticks towards a monumental Supreme Court decision, anger and outrage are being spewed by millions of people on both sides of this national debate.
Hello, I'm Gary Anthony Ramsey. On this week's edition, we take a look at this explosive issue. Why supporters say losing it is racism, why opponents say keeping it is racism. Affirmative action, the problem or the solution?
Affirmative action, an issue that has been the subject of debate, controversy, and emotion, has once again reached the highest levels of power in the United States. Right now, there is a case dangling before the United States Supreme Court, and the decision could potentially do away with affirmative action policies, guidelines and programs that were meant to carve a wider path for minorities in places they were previously denied a presence at all, from colleges and graduate programs to the workforce. It's a possibility that has its supporters very concerned.
And you just can't say affirmative action should be gone, everyone should get in on their own merit, when all affirmative action does is help to rectify access issues and also highlights inequalities around education.
I believe affirmative action is fairly misunderstood. A lot of people believe that affirmative action is giving unqualified people an opportunity for a position, whereas in fact, affirmative action is really just a policy in place to level the playing field.
People from underdeveloped communities and people from suburban areas, they're able to compete and see who may be the best candidate. Affirmative action is a policy and a plan that is definitely needed.
But some say not only has the need for affirmative action passed, in fact, they see it as harmful. And what may surprise you, some of those critics are members of minority groups.
They're creating the environment that doing worse is still acceptable.
Absolutely, I believe that affirmative action as practiced today is harmful in this sense. It often has the effect of placing applicants in positions to which they are not able to compete effectively and are unprepared for.
Webster's definition of affirmative action reads, an active effort to improve the employment or educational opportunities of members of minority groups and women.
But what's missing from that definition is why affirmative action came to be. Despite America's promise of being the land of the free, it wasn't that long ago when that didn't apply to minorities and women. In fact, in most of the country, they were literally banned from applying to universities or seeking higher employment. Discrimination was illegal and accepted policy.
It wasn't until 1965 that President Lyndon Johnson issued an executive order demanding affirmative action, that businesses and academia make a concerted effort to consider race and gender in admittance decisions. It was a way of making up for the discrimination that had become so acceptable and created new opportunities for those who had been consistently turned away. But time has passed. Critics say so has the need for affirmative action.
It gives the false impression to those successful professionals and or students that minority applicants simply aren't able to compete. What we ought to be trying to do is find ways to get minorities to those programs where they can succeed, where they can thrive, where they can actually be quite successful.
Affirmative action does not negate a person's abilities. What affirmative action does is just give access.
While there is vast disagreement about how affirmative action is implemented today, there is no dispute about its history.
It's very clear that there was a time when applications were literally being ripped up if they were coming from African Americans or women.
It all started with a young man named Heman Sweat. The time is 1946, the place, Austin, Texas. Sweat, a highly successful college grad, decides to apply to law school at the University of Texas. But for him, there's just one problem. He is black.
And Herman is applying at a time when there was an explicit policy where blacks could not apply and actually get admitted to white institutions.
The University of Texas had a policy of denying admissions to African Americans.
As predicted, Heman Sweat is rejected. But what's not expected is his willingness to fight. He hires a then unknown attorney named Thurgood Marshall, who argues that Sweat deserves equal treatment. The court's solution: create another university that is equal but separate from white students, a blacks-only law school.
The reality of not having a Negro law school to put Herman into resulted in the creation of the first Negro law school, but in this case it was put in the basement of the state capitol building.
But their solution, while separate, is anything but equal. The school in the basement is under-resourced and substandard. Sweat continues to fight, and the case goes all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court, where justices rule the University of Texas Law School must allow him to attend. He becomes the first black man to walk through its doors as a law student. Heman Sweat is victorious. Thurgood Marshall would eventually become the first black jurist on the U.S. Supreme Court.
He absolutely was justified in bringing the case that he should not be told by a taxpayer-funded institution that merely because of his race he could not attend. It was wrong of the school to have such a policy, and it would be wrong, in my view, to award someone because of their race.
Over the past few decades, America has seen more minorities in positions of power and authority, even what many thought was the impossible, the election of President Barack Obama.
We have a black president, right? So we have a number of people in positions of power and, and heading up companies who are minorities. And so the notion around the need for affirmative action being, more that it complicates it, because visibly you have more representation in positions of power.
According to organizations like Project 21, granting admission to minorities who may not have the same test scores as some of their colleagues will scar their self-esteem, making them feel substandard for life.
That is a terrible injustice. Meanwhile, I have to keep emphasizing, the people around them watching conclude these minorities just aren't able to keep up with it. Now, why would we want to tell our youngest, our most influential generation that that's the attitude that they ought to have about minorities?
But supporters of affirmative action couldn't disagree more.
I think one of the worst arguments against affirmative action is that people are being admitted or hired because they're not qualified. I think that's a fallacy.
Here's the question. Does the fact that one person with lower test scores or lower grade point average, also known as a GPA, determine that person to be less qualified?
I think if you take all of what I've done thus far, I doubt that my qualifications didn't match those of anyone else.
Graduate student Valeriano Blackburn grew up in East St. Louis, an area that is 97% black, where about a third of the population is at or below the poverty level. And according to the FBI, it has the highest crime rate in the country.
I was not given, I would say, the same tools as someone in the suburban areas. You can easily get sidetracked with things from the outside, skipping school, drugs of some sort. So there are a lot of things that you can easily get involved with when you are put in a community that is lacking economic development.
And while Blackburn doesn't know if affirmative action got him into this graduate school, he does feel it helped him with a high school summer program, an event that transformed his future.
I was given the opportunity to go to the University of Illinois during a summer program, which changed my entire perspective of school. That was the beginning of my positive trajectory. And that is something that I have to say changed everything.
But even among students who support affirmative action, there is some conflict, not in the principle, but in how it is actually implemented.
The intention is correct. The way it has benefited a lot of students and people in the workforce is correct, but it is easily abusable as well.
It has been a change in how affirmative action has been implemented from really the 1970s until present day. Now we're seeing a real sort of retraction, pulling back on a lot of the policies. So it has morphed, evolved into something quite different than its intended purpose.
Then high school student Abigail Fisher comes along. When applying to colleges, the University of Texas is her first choice. So when she received a rejection letter, she isn't just disappointed. She feels an injustice has occurred.
There were people in my class with lower grades who weren't in all the activities I was in who were being accepted into UT, and the only other difference between us was the color of our skin.
Abigail Fisher's race, white, was held against her, whereas other students, even though they had lower test scores, lower class rank, the fact that they had race in their favor allowed them to get in instead of Miss Fisher.
In a case of historic irony, the University of Texas is now at the opposite end of the spectrum. The school that once banned blacks now advocates diversity. In 2003, they announced that they will use race as one of the considered factors during their admissions process. Abigail Fisher claims this process infringed upon her rights.
Ms. Fisher says her race was the reason she was rejected.
Affirmative action doesn't perpetuate racism or reverse racism. Race is only one factor in looking at affirmative action and access.
Ms. Fisher's case has drawn the support of America's conservative community. Her legal team argues that essentially a minority stole her spot and her chance to pursue the education she felt she deserved.
I feel for Ms. Fisher and others like her who have been denied opportunities for a future and denied her aspirations and her dreams solely because of her race. And I think that's unfair. I think that that is wrong. And when I see things that are unjust and unfair, I feel duty-bound to call it out.
I don't think it's fair to say that people are being judged on the basis of their race. When you're taking a holistic approach in an academic environment for admissions, you are looking at all aspects of that person.
The holistic approach. The University of Texas, along with many other schools, use this method for evaluating applicants. The university says it's not just a numbers game of GPA and SAT scores, that each student brings a different package, a unique blend of characteristics. Among those factors to be considered is race. During the course of the case, our investigation uncovers the records of the other students who had been admitted. According to the University of Texas, the proof is in the paperwork, declaring Abigail Fisher just simply did not make the cut. You be the judge.
There is no way that you can look at other applicants and say, well, this person was admitted because they were a minority and this person was denied because they were not.
But race becomes a real thing to hang your hat on. Black kid or Latino kid got my seat, when in reality that's not true.
In total, 73 briefs are filed in support of the university's position, including those from business executives, government officials, and even retired military leaders like Colin Powell, who argue that affirmative action must stay in place to create a pool of qualified minority applicants now and in the future.
Diversity in the classroom is critical. Any discussion, a cultural discussion, is really much more enriching for all students if you have a diverse array in the classroom.
Quite often, schools and other advocates of affirmative action programs have attempted to make the case that there was merit to a law school creating an environment where all the various representatives culturally, ethnically were present. That is balderdash. That's made up. That's not the rule of law. That's not jurisprudence. That's just psychobabble.
Rule of law or not, supporters maintain that diversity is not just helpful. They say it's imperative, that it's the only way to keep up with an ever-changing economy and world.
The diversity of America is changing not only how we consume, but our productivity, and that if companies and higher ed institutions in particular want to stay ahead of this sort of productivity, world productivity curve, then focusing on diversity needs to be front and center.
I think it is a great thing that any institution is trying to diversify its population to have different mindsets and have different perspectives.
Now all we're just saying is, can we have an open conversation if we don't have the, quote, right mix of Americans? First question is, what's the right mix of Americans? Is it actually the case that you need 5 blacks in the class, a minimal threshold, or can 2 do it? Or is it possible that you could find an empathetic 10 whites? This, again, is angels dancing on a pinhead for a thesis that is not proven.
Athletes with lower GPAs and test scores, I mean, that's probably the most egregious example of where affirmative action is not critiqued.
It's no secret in America that talented high school athletes are recruited and offered scholarships to prestigious institutions, even though their grades and scores are often below those of their colleagues. Yet there is no legal battle to undo this system. Is there a difference?
You know, I'm not going to suggest that we do away with that, but those who are going to say that that's perfectly fine really shouldn't have any objection to looking at race as a factor.
I often hear that athletes or even large donors and their children are somehow able to obtain admissions to elite schools, and if we're going to have standards like that, why can't we also do them on the basis of race? The question includes the answer. It's race.
What I would have a problem with is the notion that if athletes get in with lower test scores, it's the same as a woman from, you know, a small town with lower test scores getting in.
As for those people, sometimes referred to as affirmative action babies, is there a stigma attached to them? Do they feel, as critics claim, that they don't have what it takes?
When I applied to graduate school, I checked the box saying that I was Hispanic as well as Black or African American.
Jalissa Baez was accepted to a prestigious graduate program in New York. And even though she was at the top of her class in undergrad, she can't help but wonder how much affirmative action influenced their decision.
I had a great GPA. I graduated with honors from my undergrad program, and I did excellent in my GRE scores. So if those were the main criteria for admissions, then definitely it justifies why I got into the program. The work experience or other factors, I'm not sure how they weight those, and that's why I wonder what percentage of my admissions was due to the fact that I was from a diverse background.
She even says that if she discovered that race was the main reason she got in, she'd want out.
If I found out that affirmative action was a large part of my admissions, I would advocate against that decision-making process at the school because I believe that it would be a disservice for students who come into the program.
The most harm, besides someone like Abigail Fisher, comes to those students who've worked their butts off and they get accepted, but they're lumped into this notion that they were just handpicked or lifted up, and they don't deserve that.
Supporters of affirmative action are often offended by such reasoning.
I don't know of any folks who are coming into academic institutions and are flunking out because race was considered as part of their application.
After completing this exhaustive process, I have decided to nominate an inspiring woman who I believe will make a great justice, Judge Sonia Sotomayor of the great state of New York.
The first Hispanic member of the U.S. Supreme Court who will weigh in on this decision refers to herself as an affirmative action baby. Despite the challenges of a very poor background, Ms. Sotomayor excelled in school, even becoming valedictorian of her high school. But when it came to applying to college, her test scores were low. According to her, affirmative action opened a special door, leading her to Princeton University, a path that ultimately changed her life.
There are a number of folks who've gained access to affirmative action and have gone way beyond expectations, right? If you think about Supreme Court Justice Sonia Sotomayor, very explicit about being an affirmative action beneficiary, top of her class at Princeton, top of her class at Yale Law School.
You internally put sort of limits on your own capabilities because you don't see a lot of yourself within the profession. That day, I just remember bawling my eyes out watching the president nominate her. And I just felt like my glass ceiling just shattered.
In fact, supporters say affirmative action is not just about race, it's also about socioeconomics. Does a student from a home with no resources really have the same chances, the same guidance as a wealthy student?
The ones who are being left out in this conversation, the ones who we're kind of losing track of, are the number of poor whites, working class whites, the resources and privileges that benefit that population are also being taken away.
No matter what the outcome of the Fisher case, the debate will likely rage on. Has the passage of time changed the need for affirmative action? And even if it has, will losing affirmative action destroy opportunities for those at a clear disadvantage? Can a colorblind society ever exist?
I'm a hopeless optimist. I hope that the Supreme Court will continue to see the benefits so as to ensure that people are having equal access.
Absolutely, there is no reason to hinder a person or provide a person a position merely because of their DNA.
It's the best way to gain access for a population that is largely America. It is the diversity of America, and we need it.
Are you going to be a success?
To measure success, you have to be able to say that you did something. I haven't done anything yet. So
do you hope to be a success?
I hope to accomplish a lot, but I want to be able to help the next person in whatever way, shape, or form.